The air on the battlefield was thick with smoke, the ground trembling beneath the sounds of explosions and the crash of enemy ships falling from the sky. Captain Jackson Steele's boots thudded heavily against the cracked earth as he led his small team of soldiers across the war-torn terrain. The sky was a dark orange, lit by fire and distant artillery. They had been sent on a rescue mission, but Jackson knew from the moment he heard the command that this was no ordinary operation. "Stay sharp, everyone," Jackson's deep voice echoed through his comms. "We're behind enemy lines, and the odds are not in our favor." His team was a tight-knit unit of experienced soldiers. They were used to combat, but this was different. They weren't here to fight. They were here to retrieve vital intel that could change the course of the war. As humans fought for their survival against the alien empire of Vornath, every piece of information counted. Jackson led his team with quiet confidence, his mind focused. The war with the Vornath had been brutal, stretching on for years. The Vornath were a fierce, technologically advanced race of aliens. Their empire stretched across several star systems, and they had no mercy for humans. The humans, though not as advanced, had an unyielding resolve. It was their strength, their will to survive, that had kept them in the fight for so long. The mission was going smoothly until they found something they weren't supposed to. A crashed Vornath ship lay ahead, its wreckage scattered across the ground. Among the wreckage was something far more important than any intel. A figure lay slumped beneath a pile of debris, her alien features hidden by a tattered cloak. "Hold position," Jackson ordered. "I'll check it out." Cautiously, he approached the figure, his pulse quickening. The shape wasn't just any Vornath soldier. It was a princess, the royal bloodline of the Vornath Empire. He could tell by the markings on her armor and the unmistakable aura of authority. The last thing he expected to find on this mission was an alien princess, especially one from the enemy's royal family. As Jackson crouched beside her, he could see that she was badly injured. Her pale green skin was covered in blood, and her eyes were barely open. She was breathing shallowly, her life slipping away. The thought of leaving her there to die crossed his mind, but it was quickly replaced by another thought. What if she had valuable information? What if she was the key to ending this war? A sense of urgency flooded through Jackson. He quickly assessed her wounds. She was on the brink of death, her pulse weak, and the blood loss was severe. If he didn't act fast, she would be gone before his team could even find her. "Medic!" he shouted over his comms. "Get over here now!" But it was too late for a medic. They were too far behind. It was just him, the princess, and the knowledge that every second counted. Jackson's mind raced. The princess wasn't just a pawn in a larger game. She was a symbol. If he saved her, the Vornath might have to acknowledge the value of humanity. The war could shift in their favor. Without thinking, Jackson made a decision. He removed his helmet, revealing his face and his identity. Then, without hesitation, he took a deep breath and pressed his wrist against the princess's wounds. His blood was warm, rich with oxygen, pumping through his veins at a steady pace. His fingers trembled slightly as he made the connection. There was no time to waste. "Please survive," Jackson whispered. "We don't win this war without you." He pressed his wrist harder against her skin, allowing his blood to flow into her weakened body. The sensation was foreign, but desperate. The air seemed to hold its breath, and in that moment, everything else, the explosions, the gunfire, the war, faded away. All that mattered was that the princess survived. Her body convulsed as the blood entered her, and Jackson pulled back in, alarm. Had he done something wrong? But then he noticed something incredible. Her skin, once pale and lifeless, began to glow faintly. Her pulse steadied, and her breathing became stronger. Slowly, her eyes fluttered open, and she gazed at him. Confused but alive. Jackson's heart skipped a beat. He had saved her. The princess's eyes locked onto his. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the weight of the situation hanging between them. She seemed to recognize him as something more than just another human soldier. A flicker of something passed between them. Curiosity, perhaps, or maybe the seed of something deeper. She opened her mouth to speak, but her voice was weak and hoarse. "Who are you?" she whispered. Jackson felt a wave of uncertainty. This wasn't how he imagined this encounter would go. He wasn't supposed to be talking to the enemy, let alone saving them. His answer was simple, though. "I'm Captain Jackson Steele. I'm here to help." The princess's gaze softened, but only for a moment. She closed her eyes again, clearly exhausted, her body still recovering from the shock. Jackson stood up, his mind racing. He knew he had done something extraordinary. The blood bond between them had already begun to form, a link between human and alien that neither of them fully understood yet. But one thing was certain. This moment would change everything. As Jackson waited for her to regain strength, he reflected on the significance of what had just happened. He had given the princess his blood. He had saved her life. And in doing so, he had forged a bond that could not be undone. The war between humans and the Vornath was about to become something entirely different. But would it be for the better? The alien princess stirred, her eyes opening once more, now with more clarity than before. She wasn't just an enemy anymore, she was something else, something more. And Jackson Steele, the human warrior who had given his blood to save her, knew that their fates were now tied together in ways no one could predict. The quiet was broken by the sound of distant gunfire as the battle continued to rage. Jackson looked at the princess, who was now slowly sitting up, still wincing from pain, but no longer on the verge of death. Her strength was returning, but there was something else in her eyes, a curiosity that hadn't been there before. She was looking at him differently now. "I owe you my life, human," she said, her voice stronger this time, though still filled with disbelief. Jackson nodded, not knowing how to respond. He had done what he thought was right, but he wasn't sure if saving her would lead to peace or something far worse. Either way, they would both have to live with the consequences. The next few moments were filled with tension. Jackson's team began to regroup around them, their weapons at the ready. They were all shocked to see the princess alive, but Jackson's focus was on her. He wasn't about to let her die again. "I'll get you out of here," Jackson said quietly. He wasn't sure how, but he knew he had to protect her now. His life was inextricably tied to hers. With a final glance at the destruction around them, they began the long journey back to safety, leaving behind the wreckage of war and the promise of something far greater. Jackson Steele had always prided himself on his ability to make split-second decisions, to remain calm under pressure, and to face the chaos of war without hesitation. But as he walked beside the princess, now recovering thanks to his blood, he felt a nagging sense of uncertainty. She wasn't just another enemy soldier. She was royalty. And he had saved her life. The atmosphere between them was thick with tension, yet there was something else, something that neither of them could quite put into words. The princess, once a symbol of the enemy's power, was now looking at him not with the disdain or hatred he had expected, but with curiosity and perhaps even a hint of gratitude. Her name was Azara, a princess of the Vornath Empire. Jackson knew she was important, not just as a leader of her people, but as a figurehead for an entire war machine. She was the key to the enemy's control, and now, against all odds, she owed her life to him, a human soldier. They had found a temporary place to rest, hidden beneath the wreckage of a destroyed Vornath ship. Jackson's team had set up a perimeter, watching the horizon for any signs of danger. The area was still crawling with enemy forces, and the last thing they needed was for the princess to be discovered alive. But for now, they were safe, and the princess was regaining strength. Azara sat against a pile of rubble, her green skin still pale but no longer ashen. Her breathing was steady, her pulse strong, and her once dilated pupils now appeared focused. She was alive, but something had changed. Her body had absorbed Jackson's blood, and it was doing something to her. She could feel it. She flexed her hands, staring at her fingers as if seeing them for the first time. Her senses were sharper, clearer. The pain that had plagued her was fading, replaced by a strange energy that coursed through her veins. It wasn't just the physical healing that amazed her. It was something more. A power she had never known. Her thoughts flickered back to the moment when Jackson had pressed his wrist against her wound, giving her his blood. She had been slipping away, her life force draining, and then nothing. Just warmth. And now, this. She could feel his blood within her, mingling with hers. It was an alien sensation, yet not entirely unpleasant. His blood was different from hers, but it was also familiar. She could sense the strength in it, the resolve, the fierce survival instinct of humanity. How could something so foreign bring about such change? Was it a fluke? Or was there more to it? Azara turned her gaze toward Jackson, who was watching her, with an intensity she hadn't expected. The warrior's eyes were sharp, calculating, but there was also something else, something softer, hidden beneath the surface. He had saved her, but why? What did he expect in return? He caught her gaze and met her eyes without flinching. There was no fear, no hate in his expression, only a quiet determination. "How do you feel?" he asked. Her voice, though still faint, was stronger now. Different. Stronger, but confused. Jackson nodded. He had seen many things on the battlefield, but this was something entirely new. The bond between them, however unlikely, was undeniable. He couldn't explain it, but he knew it existed. His blood had changed her, and now they both had to live with the consequences. "We'll get you back to our base. The doctors will help you recover," Jackson said, trying to sound reassuring, though he didn't know if it would make a difference. This was uncharted territory. A Vornath princess, saved by a human warrior's blood, wasn't something anyone had anticipated. Azara looked at him, her eyes searching. "You're not afraid of me?" Jackson's lips twitched slightly in amusement. "Should I be?" "I am your enemy," she replied, the words heavy in the air. "I am the princess of the Vornath Empire. I'm part of the force that's been destroying your people." He shrugged. "I'm not afraid of you." Azara stared at him for a long moment, considering his words. He was right. She had been nothing but an enemy to him and his people. Yet here he was, helping her, treating her as if she were no different from his fellow soldiers. There was no fear, no hatred in his eyes, only something she couldn't place. It was almost strange. A human who should have despised her was offering help. It felt unnatural. But in that moment, something shifted. She had read about humans. They were considered weak, emotional creatures by her people, nothing compared to the cold logic and power of the Vornath. But here was Jackson Steele, proving everything she had been taught wrong. "Why did you save me?" Azara asked, her voice quiet, unsure. Jackson looked away, scanning the horizon for any movement. His instincts told him to stay focused, but he could feel her gaze burning into him. He knew this was a question that could change everything. "I did it because it was the right thing to do," he said finally, his voice steady. "You're not just an enemy. You're a person, and people deserve a chance." Her heart skipped, a beat. She had expected him to say something about the war, about strategy or survival, but instead he had spoken words that were simple but powerful. Something inside her shifted again. The war, the politics, the hatred. It all seemed distant now. She was no longer just a princess of the Vornath Empire. She was Azara, a person whose life had been saved by a human warrior. As the hours passed, Azara continued to heal, her senses sharpening even more. She could hear Jackson's heartbeat from across the room, could smell the faint scent of the planet's flora in the air. It was overwhelming, this newfound awareness. Her body, once fragile and injured, was becoming something else entirely. Jackson had told her that they would take her back to their base, but something inside her hesitated. She didn't want to be a prisoner. She didn't want to owe her life to anyone, especially not a human. But at the same time, she didn't know if she could survive on her own now. Her body had changed. She needed time to understand it. "How much farther?" she asked, standing to her feet, her legs steady now. She felt the urge to move, to do something. Her body was restless, craving action. Jackson looked up at her, surprised by her sudden change in energy. "We've got a couple of hours to go. You're in no condition to be walking long distances." "I'm fine," Azara replied, her voice firm. She took a few steps forward, testing her strength. She was surprised at how strong she felt, stronger than she ever had before. It was as if she had been reborn. Jackson shook his head but couldn't suppress a smile. "You're stubborn. I'll give you that." Azara looked at him, her gaze serious. "You don't understand, do you? This feeling inside me, it's like nothing I've ever known. It's not just the blood. It's something more. Something that's changing me." Jackson paused, considering her words. He didn't understand, not fully. But he knew one thing for sure. The war had just become something else entirely. He and Azara were no longer just enemies. They were connected in ways neither of them could yet comprehend, and the universe would have to change to accommodate that bond. As they walked together through the wreckage, side by side, Jackson couldn't help but feel that this moment, this strange, impossible connection, was the beginning of something much bigger than either of them. The fate of two species, the fate of the galaxy was now tied together, and neither of them knew where it would lead. The journey back to the human base was longer than Jackson had anticipated. The landscape, a mix of dense forests and broken terrain, seemed to stretch on endlessly. Yet, despite the distance, there was something different about the air now. A tension that had once hung between him and Azara was slowly beginning to change. They were no longer just a soldier and an enemy princess. They were connected in a way that neither of them fully understood. Jackson glanced at Azara, who was walking beside him with surprising confidence. Her steps were steady, her eyes alert. She had already come so far from the near-death state she had been in when he first found her. It was as if his blood had awakened something inside her, something that was beyond just physical healing. "How are you feeling?" Jackson asked, breaking the silence. Azara looked at him, a flicker of something in her eyes. "Stronger," she said, her voice calm but firm. "But also different." Jackson's brow furrowed. "Different how?" Azara hesitated for a moment before responding. "I don't know how to explain it. It's like my senses are sharper, like I can feel things I couldn't before. My body, it feels like it's full of energy. I can't control it." Jackson nodded slowly, understanding that what she was describing went beyond the usual recovery. His blood had done something to her, something that neither of them could have predicted. As they continued walking, Jackson felt a strange sense of unease. He had saved her life, but now the consequences of that action were becoming more and more apparent. What if her transformation became something dangerous? What if the changes in her were uncontrollable? The human base was in a remote area, hidden beneath the thick canopy of the forest. It was a small facility, just a few buildings surrounded by high walls and guarded by armed soldiers. As they approached the base, Jackson signaled for his team to lower their weapons. The soldiers hadn't seen Azara yet, but they knew she was with him. They had been briefed on the situation, though no one could fully grasp what was happening. When they entered the base, the first thing Azara noticed was the smell. Clean, metallic, and sterile. It was so different from the Vornath warships, which were cold and impersonal. The humans, despite the conflict, had something warmer, something that seemed to give their base a sense of life. Inside, Jackson led her to the medical bay, where several doctors were waiting. They had been briefed on her condition, but Jackson knew they weren't prepared for the reality of what had happened. No one could have predicted how his blood would have changed her. One of the doctors, a woman named Dr. Elisa Carter, stepped forward as Jackson and Azara entered. Her eyes widened when she saw the princess standing there, looking far healthier than she had any right to be. "Captain Steele," Dr. Carter said, her voice trembling slightly, She looks different." Jackson nodded. "I gave her my blood. She's recovering faster than we thought. But there's something else. Something more." Dr. Carter approached Azara cautiously, her medical instincts kicking in. "How are you feeling, Your Highness?" she asked, trying to maintain her professionalism. Despite the overwhelming situation, Azara nodded. "I feel stronger. I don't know why." Dr. Carter's eyes narrowed as she studied the princess, then turned to Jackson. "We need to run some tests. This isn't just a simple blood transfusion. There's something in your blood that's affecting her biology." Jackson felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had already known that something was changing within Azara, but hearing it from the doctor made it feel more real, more dangerous. For the next few hours, the doctors ran tests on Azara. Jackson remained by her side, watching with a mix of worry and curiosity. Azara didn't seem to mind. She was still adjusting to the new sensations inside her, and the tests were an opportunity to understand what was happening. But as the doctors worked, they began to discover things that none of them had expected. Her heart rate was stronger than it should have been for an injured alien princess. Her body temperature had risen, and her blood pressure was steady, even, though she had only just recovered from near-fatal injuries. But the most surprising result came when they examined her neural activity. "Captain," Dr. Carter said, her voice filled with awe, "her brain activity is off the charts. We're seeing patterns that don't match anything we've studied in Vornath. Physiology. Her mind is processing information at a rate we've never seen before." Azara looked at Jackson, her expression a mixture of confusion and awe. "What does that mean?" "It means," Dr. Carter said carefully, "that your body is adapting to the human blood in ways that are unnatural. It's like your brain is evolving, tapping into new potential. You're becoming something more than you were before." Azara absorbed this information quietly. She was still struggling to understand the changes she was experiencing, but the doctor's words confirmed what she had been feeling. She wasn't just healing, she was transforming. As the night wore on, Azara's transformation continued. Her physical strength grew exponentially, and her mind became sharper than ever. She could feel the energy flowing through her body, coursing through her veins, driving her to new heights. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. In the quiet of the base, Jackson and Azara found themselves alone in the medical bay, the weight of the situation finally sinking in. Jackson had been pacing, unable to sit still with the uncertainty gnawing at him. Azara, on the other hand, was calm, her eyes distant as she focused on her own thoughts. "I don't know what's happening to me," Azara said, breaking the silence. "I feel different. Stronger, yes, but also disconnected from everything I knew." Jackson stopped pacing and turned to face her. "It's not just the blood. It's a part of you now. I think you've changed on a deeper level." She looked at him, her eyes searching. "But I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for you to save me." Jackson took a deep breath. I didn't save you because I wanted something in return. I saved you because you deserved it. Azara's eyes softened, and for the first time since they met, she saw him not as an enemy but as something more. There was a connection between them, unspoken yet undeniable. They had crossed a line that neither could take back. You've changed too, she said quietly. Your blood, it's not just in my body. It's in my mind, in my soul. It's like we're bound together now. Jackson hesitated, unsure of how to respond. His own thoughts were a swirl of confusion. He had never expected anything like this. He had thought saving her was just a matter of survival, but now he realized it was far more than that. They had forged an unspoken bond, a bond that went beyond blood, beyond war. We've both changed, Jackson said softly, and the world around us is going to change too. The war, the way we see each other, it's all different now. Azara nodded slowly. I don't know what happens next, but I do know that I owe you my life. And now, I feel like I owe you something more. Jackson's gaze met hers, his heart pounding, in his chest. We'll figure it out. Together. The transformation had only just begun. Azara's newfound strength was beginning to manifest in ways that even she couldn't explain. Her mind was sharper, faster, and her body was becoming something beyond her understanding. The bond between her and Jackson had tied their fates together in ways neither of them could have predicted. But one thing was clear. The galaxy was about to be changed, and so were they. As the night turned into morning, the two of them sat in silence, each lost in their thoughts. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and now they would face whatever came next, together. The peaceful quiet that had settled over the human base was shattered when an explosion rattled the walls of the facility. Jackson Steele was already on his feet, reaching for his weapon before the sound had even fully registered. The base had always been a target, but today it seemed as if the war had come crashing down on them. "Alert! All units, prepare for breach!" came the frantic shout over the comms. Jackson didn't need to hear more. His instincts kicked in. He grabbed Azara's arm, pulling her to her feet. "Stay close," he ordered, his voice tense. Azara, who had been recovering and adjusting to her newfound strength, didn't hesitate. She was stronger now, faster, but even she knew that this situation would require more than just her physical prowess. She had to stay focused, on Jackson, on the mission. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. Their lives and the lives of everyone at the base were now at risk. The sound of gunfire echoed through the corridors, and the walls seemed to shake with each explosion. Jackson led Azara through the base's underground passageways, away from the main building. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and dust, and the once sturdy walls were now crumbling under the pressure of the attack. "What's happening?" Azara asked, her voice steady, though her eyes betrayed her concern. Jackson's eyes narrowed. "We've been compromised. Someone on the inside tipped off the enemy." Azara clenched her fists, her alien senses on high alert. She could feel the intensity of the battle raging just outside. But something was off. The usual chaos of war, the constant clash between humans and aliens, felt different now. She had been changed, and with it, so had her perception of the world. As they moved deeper into the base, Jackson's team of soldiers met them in the hallway. Their faces were grim, their weapons ready. "Captain," one of the soldiers, Sergeant Reed, said with a frown, "we've got a problem. It's not just the Vornath, it's someone inside the base. A traitor." Jackson's jaw tightened. A traitor? That was the last thing they needed right now, but there was no time to dwell on it. "We need to get to the command center," Jackson said. "We can't let them take it." Azara nodded, her resolve hardening. She might have once been part of the Vornath Empire, but that was no longer who she was. She was someone different now, someone who had felt the warmth of human blood, someone who had seen what was possible when enemies came together. She wasn't about to let a traitor tear it all down. As they made their way through the twisting hallways, the base seemed to grow quieter, the sounds of gunfire replaced by an eerie stillness. It didn't take long for them to realize that something was wrong. "Where is everyone?" Sergeant Reed asked, his voice low with suspicion. Jackson's grip on his weapon tightened. "Stay alert. We're walking into a trap." Just as he spoke, the doors to the command center opened with a hiss, revealing several figures standing inside. Jackson's heart sank. There, standing in the center of the room, was General Malik, a trusted leader in the human forces. But he wasn't alone. He was flanked by several soldiers, all of them wearing the insignia of the Vornath Empire. Azara's eyes widened as she took in the scene. "General Malik," she said, her voice laced with disbelief. You betrayed us?" Malik's cold smile sent a shiver down her spine. "Betrayal is a strong word, Princess. I prefer to think of it as survival." He turned to Jackson. "I thought you'd be smarter than this, Captain. Did you really think you could win this war with only blood and good intentions?" Jackson's chest tightened as the realization hit him like a punch. General Malik had been working with the Vornath all along. He had been feeding them information, undermining their efforts from the inside. This wasn't just an attack on the base. It was a setup, carefully orchestrated to break the human resistance. "You've put all of us in danger," Jackson said, his voice thick with anger. "What did they promise you, Malik? Power? Control?" Malik's smile widened. "You don't understand, Steele. The Vornath are the future, and I'll be at their side when the humans are nothing but a memory." The soldiers flanking Malik stepped forward, their weapons aimed at Jackson and Azara. There was no going back now. They were outnumbered, and it was clear that the base was lost. Azara took a step forward, her eyes locked on Malik. "You've made a mistake," she said softly, her voice low but filled with determination. "The Vornath are not your allies. They'll use you, discard you. You'll never have control over them. You think you've won, but you've only sealed your fate." Malik laughed, a cruel sound that echoed in the small room. "You still don't get it, do you? It's already over." Before Jackson could react, Malik nodded to one of his soldiers, who raised a gun and fired. The bullet struck Jackson in the shoulder, sending him crashing to the ground with a grunt of pain. He gritted his teeth, trying to push through the pain. But the world seemed to spin around him. "Jackson!" Azara cried, rushing to his side. Malik's voice was cold and calculated. "Get up, Steele. You're not dead yet. But you will be soon unless you give up. Hand over the princess. The Vornath will take her. She's the key to everything, don't you see?" Jackson struggled to push himself to his feet, his vision blurry from the pain. His breath came in short gasps, but his resolve remained strong. "You won't win," he managed to say. "No matter what you do to us, you won't win." Azara looked at Jackson, her eyes filled with both concern and determination. She could feel the human blood inside her, urging her to fight. She wasn't the same princess who had once ruled with cold detachment. She was more than that now. More than the Vornath ever knew, and she wasn't going to let this traitor destroy everything. With a sudden burst of energy, Azara lunged forward. Her movements were faster than anything Malik's soldiers had ever seen. In an instant, she disarmed one of them, knocking him to the ground with a force that stunned everyone. She then turned on the others, her speed and strength overwhelming them. Malik watched in disbelief as the soldiers he had trusted were taken down, one by one. "You've made your choice," Azara said, her voice calm but deadly. "And now it's over." Malik's smile faltered. "You think you can defeat me? You're nothing but a tool, princess. You're nothing without the Vornath. Azara's eyes narrowed, her body glowing with a power she could no longer ignore. You're wrong. I've never been more than a tool. But now, I am my own person. In a flash, she struck. Her fist collided with Malik's chest, sending him flying across the room. He crashed into the wall, crumpling to the floor, unconscious. Jackson slowly stood up, his shoulder aching, but his heart lifted as he watched Azara. She had done it. She had turned the tide. She was no longer the princess he had found that day on the battlefield. She was a warrior, a force to be reckoned with. As the last of Malik's soldiers were subdued, Azara turned to Jackson. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. Jackson nodded, though he winced from the pain in his shoulder. "I'm fine. You saved us." Azara's gaze softened, her eyes meeting his. "No, you saved me, and now we fight together." Jackson smiled despite the pain. "Together," he repeated. As they stood in the wreckage of the command center, Jackson and Azara realized that the war was far from over. But the betrayal they had faced had only made them stronger. They had each other now, and together they would fight for a future no one had expected. The smoke from the attack had finally started to clear, but the damage to the base was undeniable. The command center lay in ruins, the walls scarred by explosions and the remnants of the traitors' forces scattered across the area. Jackson Steele stood in the midst of it all, his shoulder aching, but his heart filled with something new, something that had nothing to do with the war. Azara stood beside him, her eyes sweeping the destruction around them. There was no sadness in her gaze, only a quiet resolve. She had seen death before, had lived with the constant shadow of violence for as long as she could remember. But now, she was different. She had changed, both inside and out. And she wasn't going to let all the bloodshed, all the suffering, be in vain. "We've won today," Jackson said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "But this war isn't over." Azara nodded, her gaze never leaving the wreckage. "No, it's not. But it will be, soon. We just need to find a way to end it." Jackson turned to face her, his eyes meeting hers. He had been by her side through so much already, and the bond between them had grown stronger with each passing day. She wasn't just the alien princess he had once saved on the battlefield. She was now a warrior in her own right, someone who had fought beside him, someone who had stood up when the world seemed against them. "You're not the same princess I found that day," Jackson said quietly. Azara smiled, though it was a small one. "Neither are you." He knew what she meant. The human blood inside her had changed her in ways neither of them could have predicted. And the bond between them, formed by that blood, had become a powerful force in its own right. It had united them, not just in survival, but in purpose. They were no longer enemies, no longer mere allies. They were something more. But the road ahead was still uncertain. Even with Malik's betrayal exposed and the traitors' forces defeated, the war was far from over. The Vornath Empire was still vast, its leaders still ruthless, and though Azara had proved herself as a formidable force, she knew that they couldn't win this alone. The galaxy would have to choose whether they were ready for a new era, one where humans and aliens could stand together, not as enemies, but as allies. "We'll need to rally the others," Azara said, her voice firm with purpose. "There are more like Malik, hidden in the shadows. We have to root them out before they destroy everything." Jackson nodded. "And we'll need allies from every corner of the galaxy. We can't win this fight alone." Together, they walked through the broken hallways of the base, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Jackson had always been a soldier, used to following orders, used to living in the chaos of war. But now he felt as if he were part of something bigger. He wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. He was fighting for a future. And Azara was. Right beside him, her presence a constant reminder of what they were working toward. Days passed as the base was rebuilt, though the scars of the attack would remain. Jackson and Azara worked tirelessly, gathering intelligence, planning their next moves. Azara took on a leadership role, not just as a princess, but as someone who had earned the respect of the humans around her. She had fought beside them, bled beside them, and had proven herself time and time again. The soldiers who had once seen her as nothing more than an enemy now looked to her as a symbol of hope. Jackson couldn't help but be amazed by how far Azara had come. The transformation she had undergone, both physically and mentally, was nothing short of extraordinary. She was no longer the distant, cold ruler of an empire. She was a leader who inspired others, who made people believe in something greater than themselves. And Jackson? He was no longer just a soldier. He had become something more, too, a protector, a partner, a man who had found his place. In a war he hadn't chosen but was now fully committed to winning. He had found a purpose in Azara, in their shared cause, and he would follow her to the ends of the galaxy, no matter what it took. The next step in their journey was clear. They needed to bring the Vornath Empire to its knees, but that meant taking the fight to their homeworld. It was a risky move, one that could cost them everything. But Jackson and Azara knew there was no other choice. The galaxy couldn't wait any longer. Azara gathered the leaders of the human resistance, her presence commanding the room. She spoke not just as a princess, but as a warrior, as someone who had earned the right to lead. The humans, who had once been divided in their distrust of her, now listened intently, hanging on her every word. "The Vornath Empire is built on fear," Azara said, her voice strong and unwavering. "But fear doesn't last forever. It's time to show the galaxy that we are stronger than their empire. Together we can end this war. Together we can create a new future." Jackson stood beside her, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon. "We're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for every living being in the galaxy who's been oppressed by the Vornath. We fight for a future where we don't have to kill each other anymore." The room was silent for a moment as the weight of their words settled in. Then, one by one, the leaders spoke up, pledging their support. The alliance between humans and aliens was no longer a dream. It was becoming a reality. The final battle was approaching. The fleet of humans, now united with those who had once been enemies, prepared to leave the safety of their base and venture into the heart of the Vornath Empire. The stakes had never been higher. They were going to challenge the might of the empire on its own soil, knowing that the odds were against them. Azara stood on the bridge of the flagship, staring out at the stars. The vast expanse of space stretched before her, an endless sea of possibility. She wasn't the princess of a lost empire anymore. She was the leader of something greater. She was the leader of a new alliance, an alliance that would reshape the future of the galaxy. Jackson stood beside her, his hand resting on the railing. "Ready for the next step?" he asked. Azara turned to him, her eyes filled with a quiet strength. "Ready. Let's end this war once and for all." The engines of the fleet roared to life, and the ship began to move forward, cutting through the darkness of space. They were on their way to the heart of the Vornath Empire, where they would face the final battle. As they traveled toward their destiny, Jackson and Azara stood side by side, their bond stronger than ever. They had fought together, bled together, and now they would finish what they had started. The galaxy was about to change, and they would be the ones to lead it into a new era. Together, they would create a future where no one had to fight alone. A future where humans and aliens could stand side by side, united not by fear but by hope.